office on my bike, so it's just what it is.
Nice. All right. Well, I am joined today by Brock Benson. And I was just saying, this is the first time I've ever seen that name, otherwise known as AKA Mayples.
Yeah,
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
you are. Yeah,
Nice. Okay. So I've come across Maples on Twitter, Brock, and basically, my understanding is you have taken a product and I believe rewritten it in HTMX. It was sort of an existing thing, and you've sort of taken what was maybe Vue and sort of turned it into HTMX. So
yeah,
that's my kind of first sort of
yeah,
reason for this. But maybe just some background, like what's your sort of tech stack and what's the app that you are developing?
yeah. So, think like basically the from an app standpoint, you can kind of think about it as simply put, think of sort of like the TurboTax of business valuation.
Okay.
So allowing instead of it being outsourced to consultants and they get back and forth with documentation. Oh, we need this. Here's a questionnaire. Let's schedule a call. All of that kind of stuff. Um, the system's built around get your quote online, get started in 5 minutes, walk
Wow.
through online signing of the document, the agreement, walk through a questionnaire. The questionnaire is dynamic in terms of defining what documents will be needed based on how you respond. From there, the documents are uploaded. There's a set, you can have multi-users with access to a client. So you can have your accountant upload stuff, whatever. Um, those documents, we don't require a format, which is
Yep.
because if you require a client to put their data in your format, they're not a client.
Yeah. Yep.
They will never use you. So that's gotten
Yep.
into like allow document types. Certain documents can be Word or PDF and so on. Parsing those
You're doing like
for our
OCR.
standardized
Yep.
format, so on, all of that, right?
Okay.
It's a
So
big, grand scale.
very ambitious project. Anything that starts with the
Covers,
phrase "the TurboTax of."
yeah, yeah. So the goal is to do 15 to 20,000 a year,
Wow.
which would require 50. And there's via estate and gift tax, via financial reporting, litigation, just divorce. There's tons of needs for business valuations, but they tend to be very expensive
I have
and
looked
very
this up
time consuming.
within the last month. I have looked up what it would take to get a business valuation, and
Yeah,
it's it's difficult and costly.
yeah. So like right currently at this stage, somebody can be done with their part of the process in 45 minutes if they have their
Wow.
stuff together with all the information we need. So, like a long story of it, right? Like how I started with the idea was like, I'm like a prior business, how annoying it was. Um, Spent a year and a half at PricewaterhouseCoopers after an earlier venture and wanted to learn and see how the process was. And I'm like, first of all, it's not very sophisticated what these people are doing. There's an
Yeah.
umbrella. You're just paying for the liability shield, basically. Um,
Interesting. All right.
and I kind of thought about it, and the vast majority of people are cut out of the market because the cost of entry is too high. It's like I really
Yeah.
should get this done, but it's too
I mean,
expensive, right?
yes. I mean, small businesses are like operating at the margins, and it's like if you're going to ask that much just to evaluate the small business, like
Totally,
that's our profit for the
totally. There may be a shareholder dispute. There's a partnership that's dissolving, and they need to get rid of a partner, which happens all of these things, and you're like, God, it's going to cost me 10 grand in 6 months to get this done.
and have to
What
review
about
it.
2,500 bucks, and you'll have it in a day,
Wow.
right? Like
So
that's the it's hugely ambitious, but like so because what it required was developing every single model that would possibly be needed
yep.
in a code in flexible manner to allow it has to be super flexible, right? In terms of what it
Yeah.
can handle. And then the system needs to have the logic and the understanding of what, based on these parameters, what to then, what process to follow.
Right.
So you can kind of think of there's a large number of LLM kind of models and agents that are sort of on a specific task.
Yep.
So documents into our standardized format, which matches with public company data, that we have a data warehouse that we're feeding, so there's Go in the back, Golang's running in the back end doing that,
Okay.
updating that.
Using an LLM or using, whatever
Just
version of
using
LLMs?
two external data sources, and we have redundancies built in case somebody, we can't lose our data.
Right.
So we've got, sorry, somebody else just came in. So,
Yeah, no worries.
So currently there's 7 different segments where there's models learning to do a specific segment of the analysis, right?
Yep.
And then those will be chained together because they kind of have to be. But from the admin side of the system, what it really is just like an observability and training, right? So here's a decision that the system's made.
Yep.
We have to be able to go and validate that, determine if that's accurate, make notes as to why, so on. So that data then is reused to then make it better at doing a specific segment, right?
Yeah.
But in order to have that, it needs to have access to everything we would need: public company data, all the charting, everything we would have for the final report that's generated. So again, I was probably extremely stupid to do this.
Yeah. So very ambitious project.
It covers a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're using LLMs, so it's new. I mean, you're working with new stuff. You're training stuff.
I mean, I've been doing that for 6+ years on that.
Okay, so like machine learning stuff before.
ChatGPT made it fun because everybody, it's like kind of feels like a new shiny thing, but this has been used.
Right.
Significantly smaller models that are very purpose-built, they're only trained on a specific task. So lots of if-else statements to get this down to a very defined task. And they can do much better with that. And I don't need the noise of, what's the capital of wherever, right?
Yeah, and you probably get a lot fewer hallucinations on data if you've limited it down to a world that it can understand.
It tends to be the better, at least what I found, is the better approach to using those models is like build a sort of a template around what they are accessing and what their mission is, right? At least that's what I found now.
Yeah. Okay, so your app is, there's this customer-facing side, which is, let me just, if you have, no need to give specifics if you don't want to, but just a rough estimate of scale of like how many is this something that's in production now being used, or is this something you're working on for the future, like launch date kind of thing?
No, so in use now,
Wow.
I kind of went about it in 2 paths. The first easier path was to focus on sort of institutional clients, so venture, private equity.
Good choice. They got money.
Well, also
I think
primarily because of data quality.
Okay.
Right? So they're audited financials, which make getting the data into the system significantly easier.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard when you're dealing with a small business that's dealing out of a shoebox.
You're getting PDFs from their accountant.
Or you have to go off their tax returns and figure out what data we need off of that. So there's a whole realm of things there that I have not dug into, but that's some of the challenges to get to that scale. We'll be figuring out that kind of component, which is going to be hard.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you're in production and you have this sort of customer-facing side, but you said there's also an admin side where you and your staff are using this to kind of validate the processes.
Yeah. So basically, we can run any segment with all the detail, and I can show a little bit of some stuff. And I think I put some out with like 20-year rolling trading multiples monthly for all the public peer group, right? With charts and so on. You can generate a report section
Okay.
for that. So that could be pieced in. The report section it develops it basically creates a PDF or a PowerPoint,
Okay.
and purposely so
Yeah.
that I can add a new section in and just export within the system, just download a specific section, throw it in there, boom, and we're good.
And every business in America can run a PowerPoint. So.
Well, it also then is just converted to PDF and it looks great.
Gotcha.
All the tables, charts, everything are all, if they're charts, they're JavaScript rendered into Puppeteer. So they look like pixel perfect and they're, tooltips, all of that. And then the other charts, what's great is they're just HTML templates that are fed from the backend data that then are converted to images. Same way, just like loaded it basically to Puppeteer, snapshot it, save it.
Awesome.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
So there's a lot, yeah.
So, and your staff, like, what's the size of that app? Is that a lot of? Is it a lot of people working with you, or is it sort of you and a couple people? Like, what's the sort of setup there?
It was primarily me for
Wow.
just seeing if it was possible.
Yep. Nice.
Every day, all day.
So you got to build the tool for yourself. Like, this is the tool I want to use for myself.
I basically built it so the first goal was, okay, can I use this tool to do a complete valuation at the standard I would want, which is like the highest investment banking kind of level standard.
And you knew that standard from your previous work at Price, with.
Yeah, when I was at PwC, and then in grad school, I got involved in a startup starting a company that this was right when it became mandatory for public companies to expense options. It used to be a footnote. It became mandatory. It was FAS 123R. It's like,
I don't know
those stupid accounting standards.
Someone will understand that, though.
50-page long accounting standards. Nobody knew what the hell they were doing.
So this kind of expertise.
My area of research was in option theory, option pricing, and then it got into sort of executive, non-transferable sort of equity comp within companies is different than publicly traded options that you can sell. You can't, there's no liquidity to sell an option in a private company. There's like a vesting and all those things. So got into how to value those and that kind of component, and started a company doing that.
Yeah. So I'll just make a quick aside. I've talked about this many times. This is such a great way to, be a developer, is to work somewhere else first and just really understand that business. That's where you're going to get these kind of innovations. That's just, my little aside opinion. And what I'm hearing from you sounds like
subject matter expertise is super. That's why I have friends who can help on auth and, general database schemas and so on, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to building specific models on how are we going to value this, or what data do we need and so on, you run into a problem where you could be the best developers in the world. And some of my friends are amazing developers, but they don't know the questions. They don't know what they don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So like when I'm looking at building something, I'm like, what are the edge cases that I need to think about? This is going to, like as an example, and one of the things, there may be a time when you want to move the date forward to when this event could happen. Well, it's not, like you have to have an update override, like little crazy things you just wouldn't think about unless you dealt with them over and over and over again.
Right. And that stuff ahead of time, instead of finding out about it when it's such a huge pain to change later on. You're changing your data structure. You're like, what? Why would a date be changeable? Why can you go into the future? It doesn't make sense. But like, if you know the business,
a funny aside is like the first, probably the first 10 or 20 I did with the system, I had the dev version open and was coding as I was completing analysis.
Nice. That's
right?
good.
So like that's just how you kind of have to like figure that out as you go along, right?
Yeah, and
And then
that's
you
your
make a note
edge
of
too.
that, and that's a feature that then is in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
just to
the
bring it back to
yeah.
HTMX here. So what was that decision process the first time you sort of decided, or maybe just looked into HTMX?
Yeah. Um, so the core JS apps are in Vue 3. As we know, there was a Vue 2. That was a problem. So when you build a giant, the number of views and so on and is enormous for the admin system to be able to have observability into and be able to run every single segment of everything
Yeah.
is huge. Well, what happened when Vue 2? I can't run with TypeScript and so on a local box. I can barely even open the thing, let alone run it, and it's bogging down and so on. So it has to be out there, right?
Yeah.
Well, Vue 2 is not supported security patches anymore unless you pay for that above now with another side company, right?
Okay.
So, and also Vue 3's, I like it a lot more in terms of the setup function and so on. Like I think it's much more svelte kind of like in that way. It's a much cleaner way, and there's some reusability that's great and so on. But yeah, the fear of having to rewrite again on a system where it's really, I don't have a problem with a really gorgeous fat client for a client-facing app, right?
Right.
Where you want the real look and feel and so on. I don't have a problem with that. You can get that really easily with those frameworks. That's what they're great at.
Right.
I have a big problem when it's on a back end. No one's going to see the light of, that's not going to see the light of day to a client. And you're kind of stuck in this like crap. I've got, you don't open it up for 3 months, let's just hypothetically say, and you've got all these deprecation warnings and so on, and you make an update and it breaks everything, and the idea, so that's what got me kind of thinking about, I'd heard some about HTMX and thought about it, and for, 90% of the code that is written, even at a front-end facing standpoint, is internal, right? There's some components that will be shared across, depending on the type of user. So with our institutional users, there's a full historical cap table, and they can see visualizations, they can run distributions and that kind of thing. But still, the fraction of what they see relative to what's there, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Unless I just want a beautiful looking system internally to look at, then yeah, right?
Yeah. Well, also in what you're talking about with, opening it up and having things be deprecated and, so, you're probably as part of a build process and stuff. And I think to me, that's one of the kind of like sleeper, like long-term things that I think gives HTMX and other tools like it that are these sort of more complete lower level projects, just a huge advantage, because I think I'm in a similar situation where the businesses that I run, I'm the one that programs it. So it's such a huge benefit to me to be able to just leave it alone for a while. I can let it sit for a year and I don't have to worry that when I come back to it, oh, what's happening now? And that did happen to me with Vue as well.
I heard that 100-year,
Yeah.
I'm like, it's dead on.
Yeah.
The pain, so it was not as painful to rewrite, and it's not all done on the admin side yet.
Yeah.
There's actually, and then funny enough, there's actually features in the HTMX version that aren't in the JS version because it's just so easy to do.
Right.
It's like, I want a piece of data in a template. I'm like, Oh, it's just right there. I'm on the back end. I don't have to rewrite, I don't have to add this to a serializer to flip it front.
Yeah, we're already in the database. Like we're right
I'm
here.
right here. I can prefetch it if I need to be quicker, define what I want and so on, but I don't need to deal with that, which is like super nice.
Yeah.
And I came up with some tricks with Htmx to make it feel more like an SPA, and I'll talk about those for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think like what really got me was vendor the file. That's my file. I wrote some extensions that I
Oh,
wanted.
really?
Yeah. So one was normally with like an Ajax download, right? You're going to get like a page refresh.
Okay. Yeah.
So, or you're not going to have any status on what's going on, right? So I have a little extension that lets me have a spinner until the file is downloaded, and then it's gone. So it's like
Nice.
feels like an SPA. Like it took a
Yeah.
second to write, and I'm like, I just want like if I'm going to be in this all the time, I want it to be nice. So why not?
Yeah.
Um,
That's cool.
so that was like the nice thing to have. Like, okay, this file is my file. It's it's out on our CDN. It's there. It's mine.
Yep.
We use Chart.js, built that version,
What do
cloned
you
it,
mean?
built it, boom, totally. So like that is, there's no external. It's mine, right? Which
Oh,
is
okay. So you brought that in and like maybe even modified it to.
I built it. So just like clone the repo, build it,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
So it's like there is no like call out to anything. That's
Nice.
here,
Yep.
right? Hyperscript,
That's funny.
all
Yeah.
for it.
Hyperscript too, huh? I've
When
had a hard time with Hyperscript getting the syntax in a way that matches what I'm expecting.
when you start getting crazy on the events, um,
Yep.
you start realizing, like the DOM's just a big event bus, right? You just bounce events around and listen for them, and it's like that's pretty nice. So there's some pretty cool things that could. So that's and then we use DocuSign. Kind of stuck with that
DocuSign. Okay. Yep.
for
To
context
actually
sign
like do the official part
to do the
of.
official signing.
Yep.
Um, we use Stripe, but that's internally. We don't do that on the X side. We create invoices, which is what people want. So
Gotcha. Yep.
we don't have no Stripe elements out there. That's the dependencies.
Interesting. Wow.
The
So
whole
that's really
dependency,
really low dependencies. And you
everything.
might never need to update your charts, .js or whatever. I mean, maybe they'll have something, but it's like
Oh,
that
sorry.
fits what you
We have
need.
there's one more dependency, and it's flat picker. The reason I went with that is zero dependencies
Yep.
on that. It's a little larger, but it during the whole load of the app. I mean, it's not like it's a landing page for a marketing site, right?
So sorry, but what does Flat Picker do?
It's just a date picker,
Oh, day picker. Oh, gotcha.
but it's
Gotcha.
no
Okay.
dependencies. There's some other like smaller date pickers that are super nice, but they don't have some of the flexibility in terms of being
Nice.
able to jump back years really easily. You kind of have to toggle back just endlessly. So there's a lot
Yeah.
more flexibility there, and that's it.
So you really are embracing the like low dependency, low dependencies, and kind of local JavaScript, being able to kind of mess with your own stuff.
Yeah,
So
I wrote a bunch of
that's awesome.
hyperscript behaviors to reuse for the autocomplete,
Okay.
which is feeding from the back end. The drop downs fed from the back end.
When you say hyperscript behaviors, this is like you mean you're writing hyperscript in there, or is that like a specific
No, so
term in
like instead of
hyperscript?
having a giant thing of hyperscript to handle arrow down, arrow up, select, enter all that. Those are
Yep.
defined in a behavior that then is just. So I did that for like a drop down menus with accessibility, like keyboard actions, and then also
Gotcha.
with an autocomplete, like just search, sends a call to the back end. That's cached after that. So if they make the same search, it's just like immediate. So
Nice.
like a couple of things like that. But see, I mean, those are mine.
Yeah.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah. Nice. So
Yeah.
so what was your what was your learning process for this? Does it just, I mean, it sounds, if I had to guess from listening to you, like you probably kind of just dove in and tried stuff out. But do you do like courses? Do you do like tutorials? Like just kind of
No,
put the code in your site?
so I think it was significantly easier, like to rewrite at the scale of the rewrite that was done was easier because there was already, look, all of the backend code is there. What was feeding the APIs is there, right?
Yep.
There's some slight modifications to list, like for triggers and things like that. Um, there were, but like the framework was there. It was like, can I replicate this? And as time went on, it got faster to replicate that. There were some challenges, like for sure. I think probably the most significant is caching's great for a client, like, experience, but
Yep.
it becomes a necessity when you have big calculations running and you need to use
Right.
that data somewhere else. Like you can't like just keep running these giant calculations over and over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was kind of the challenge. And also the data can be dynamic. What comes into a calculation can change based on any number of factors. So that
Including
needs to be
time.
invalidated, right?
Yeah.
So I can't really browser cache a lot of stuff
Hmm.
because it's hard to selectively choose a browser cache to, you just kind of nuke the whole thing, which is what, when they log out, it's just nuked, right? That's
Yep.
fine, but I can't nuke everything. Some pages could be browser cached, like as an example, there's like a full Fred search, like all the econ data and stuff that's needed, all the bond yields, all that kind of stuff. That's part of the part that's needed. The system needs for an economic section of the report and all that.
Mm-hmm.
That changes. That's just cache for a day. Like it doesn't need.
Interesting.
So
Yep.
if you go to that page, you go first, it loads because it's got like the suggested and so on. But you come back, it's just like browser cache,
Right.
millisecond, right? Like no problem. But a lot of other stuff was challenging figuring that out and caching validation, and which is something you don't deal with necessarily the same. Like caching validation on the front end is hard, but you're dealing with like data coming from one endpoint. You may have a key on that, of course, right? Like you can kind of share that around. It's just kind of in virtual state. We're not
Yep.
using a store for it, but it's kind of just in virtual state. And you can kind of use it where you need to. And when you make a mutation to that, something that would impact that, you just change it, right? That's, you refetch it in the background. Like you can do that, but it's really hard. Like I would love to browser, like the marketing site stuff, which is still needs a ton of work. I haven't even gotten to that. That's browser cached like all over the place.
Yeah. Yep.
Preload with the preload extension of HTMX, and you're just like, dude, it's like,
Yeah. It's instant if you're not doing these kind of calculations.
it's instant, right? And if nothing's variable, like a delay on a blog post or something of an hour, like big deal, right? Like no big deal.
Right.
But I can't have that when everything's dynamic, like how they, like documents can change and so on. So yeah, the caching, there's some limitations there on the HTMX side. Just I think just the scope of the calculations being run and the challenges when everything is its own page, right?
Yeah.
If you have subsections within a page that may be sharing the same data throughout, those are, in an SPA, that data is just fetched on the top level, shared down through where you need it, right? And
Interesting.
like
So you
comparing,
would, with your front end setup, you would be actually running the calculations on the front end also,
revalidating.
theoretically.
Yeah, so
Because,
there are suggested outcomes from the system,
yep.
right? And then run the calculation to validate. And just
Okay.
see if, we select something different, here's why, so on, that kind of thing. Right?
Gotcha.
So there's suggestions, but we have to, it has to be validated. So you're rerunning the calculations.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So moving stuff, just in general, putting more stuff on the server side using HTMX.
Yeah.
The caching was kind of your biggest challenge there, you'd say?
Not on
Or
the, funny, not on the client stuff really. Like anything that we would want. Like I've got some clients who are using an HTMX version,
okay.
which is kind of cool. And as I said, I think there's some features in there that, well, I know there's some features that I like a lot in there that aren't in the other one. But
Yeah.
caching was just a hard thing in using it in the way we use it to revalidate from an admin side. I can be a little more aggressive on caching validation when it's just the admin side.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I'm not concerned about my experience. I'm just concerned I don't want to wait. I don't have to set a longer timeout on the HTMX timeout to get what I need, right? On a request.
Right.
I don't want to have to override it relative to 6 seconds because sometimes there's some big calculations. Or if you're running a whole report section with all the images and all the content, they're big.
Yeah.
And if that's run once, I want it to be cached, but then if something changes because you're like, oh, that's not right, that has to be invalidated to run again. Right. It's not a necessity, but it just makes usability of the system.
Yeah.
I don't really care about like the speed per se. Like
right. But I mean, it would probably piss you off if it were slow.
If it's going to take me 5 or 10 minutes every time I try to do a little thing to revalidate, it's not going to work if we are lucky enough to get to a scale we want to where there's like 50 of these a day. It's just,
exactly.
Like there's just things we have to kind of, it's easier to think about those now a little bit, at least have a plan, and you may not implement the whole plan, but you're like, I know how this can be handled, or can it be, or because a lot of us was testing.
Okay.
Right? Like, so the advantage is like we're 2 systems anyway. It's not like I was writing it from scratch and there was a timeline and so on, right? There's systems working right. Systems that are there, which made it a much nicer, and I could take the time to write a really cool autocomplete, right? Or I could do some things because it wasn't under like the pressure. This has got to be done on a timeline.
Yeah. You've got a version of it up and running, and it's a matter of, what do you want to make better?
I sort of put my foot in the water a little bit and was like, okay, is this going to work for some of these things? And I picked a hard thing.
Nice. Perfect.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just kind of kept going, and now there's and I will actually say even if we never use this site, the HTMX version, I would say that it has made the system significantly better.
Interesting. Wow.
Because of I believe wholeheartedly that the more have as dumb of a front end as possible, and you are in a significantly better world.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm there with you. Just speed stuff aside, I think having a kind of dumb front end will help with I don't know if you ever end up having to display a lot of data and things like that. But the sites that I work on, people will say like, oh, you can't show that much to users. No user wants to see 1,000 rows at once, and that's not what I've seen. Users, they want to see everything. They want to see all their data sometimes. It's not everybody, but my experience has been the dumber the browser or the dumber the front end code, the client side, the dumber the client, the faster the browser is just going to throw that up there. And then you do have to do caching on the back end.
There's a super funny thing, I can, pages that look identical, one in a full JavaScript framework, identical styling, literally the identical page next to an HTMX version of the page. And it's super fun to be able to look at those.
Yeah.
I mean, they're identical. The systems are, all intents and purposes, identical. I just mirrored over.
Wow.
Um,
I mean, that's
and
a
there's
cool case
things.
study.
What's that?
That's a cool case study. Just, I mean, if you know, that's a neat
Like
thing
I
to
haven't
have.
done a code count like drop.
Yep.
Um, because I haven't, yeah, like not everything's there, and there's certain things where you're just like, I don't know, it's not quite as easy to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And like, there's a couple of things where there's just so much data involved in different options you can, for example, like cost of equity, right? There's rolling betas, there's correlations, there's returns, there's market risk premium, all of that. So in the front end, in the JavaScript one, you just all that data is calculated at once because it's a lot of it's interdependent. Like the prices you're using are used for all of that. So the stock
Okay.
prices you grab from your are used for all of that those calculations. So it just sends it all to the front. It calculates, it sends it all. So then you go from tab to tab. You're like, fine, I can totally do that in the HTMX version. I'm probably going to have to, but
Hmm.
it's just me. And then if I'm using Hyperscript, which I am,
Yep.
I've got to listen to like there's like 20 different tabs effectively,
Okay.
combinations, so on. If all that data is calculated at once and sent forward, so those are all going to be created in the DOM, and I'm going to have to toggle between which one is which one. You're right. So it's
Yeah.
like I've hit some scale. Like I wouldn't suggest like just go out there and do that on a very intensive like equivalent like of a trading app. Um,
Yep.
you
Well,
can do it.
and the reason it works is because it's okay for that data to just live on the client side. Like that state is really just for the current user in that moment
Yeah.
to mess with the numbers. If that were to be saved, that would have to go to the server, So, that is, I think, a good example of something that works on the client side.
Yeah,
If,
and there's no storing in it's just in virtual,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like on the front ends, I use Tanstack query, which is great. The Vue
Okay.
version is great, so it's got key and validations and so on. It's great from that standpoint. It can refetch on an interval and super simple. I'm definitely not reinventing that front end crap. That's
All
for
right.
sure. Um, I'll let people with significantly more intelligence than me worry about that stuff, and I'll focus on my little niche. Um, but yeah, like I've definitely come up against some roadblocks. They're not insurmountable, and certain parts of the rewrite on certain things I did it that way, and I'm like, oh, this is super great. It's not as
Yeah.
elegant, but it's like super cool.
Yeah, so one thing that I've liked about sort of following your journey on Twitter with HTMX is I think you've shown some of the good and the bad.
Yeah.
You've been sort of honest along the way about I don't know. I wrote down one tweet that's just started. I think it was just from like maybe this month even. Just today, I hate HTMX
Yeah.
was how it started. So
Yeah.
and I don't remember what that one was about. I think maybe it was having to do with caching and or something, or maybe you just couldn't hit something on the front end.
Yeah.
But you've come across several of those, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like
I
it
do.
doesn't mean everything's
I
easy.
definitely don't want to come off as some like. Well, I probably should preface that because I am like wholeheartedly a perfectionist. Like even if I'm just going to look at it, so like
Yeah,
everything I do, I think is garbage. That's just like the nature of what I do because I'm like it's just how it is. I don't know,
yeah,
maybe that motivates me still or whatever. Um, well, I know it does.
yeah, yeah,
But I don't have time to get to it. There's just too many things. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's just, but I don't want to come off as some like speed, like caching is like you got to cache everything and so on. The caching, from my standpoint, was solely out of the usability,
yep,
right? Like it was not an over optimization. Like things have got to be fast. I did a couple of, and I'll talk about a couple of little tweaks that are just kind of fun things that like bothered me about a server rendered site.
yep,
And I did those, but those were like 5 lines of code to do them. right? Like super easy, but they make you feel like you're on an SPA. But the caching stuff was solely from like just again, a usability. Like when you're running, so like let's say you have 10 public peer companies and you're running 10-year monthly cumulative rolling multiples with cumulative weighted averages and so on top of all that for a giant chart with tables and so on. Those are just big calculations.
Yeah.
They're fast per se, like fast in general, but not fast from like an immediate response kind of thing. And you can't keep slamming, like I don't want to keep slamming those calculations over and over and waiting. And I'd like to be able to bounce to a section to get more information on, okay, why was that selected? Then come back and it's cache and I hit it again and it's like right there, right? Just from like that may be fine in like isolation of like one, if you're just doing one little thing. But if you're bouncing around validating a lot of different things with all the assumptions that are going into an analysis, and you've got to come and rerun those every time and wait for however long to do that, it just wasn't very usable. Yeah. So that's where that all came from.
As it should. I mean, this is what, you're the person, if a lot of programmers are not necessarily building sites that they have to use themselves.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference if you're the person using it, what your focus is going to be.
Yeah.
And usability, I mean, that really should, in my opinion, like every web developer should have that front and center because that's what it's all about. You want
I don't
to use
mind
it and
waiting
enjoy it.
a second. Like that's not like some crazy thing. And I don't mind waiting 2 seconds or whatever, right? But if that cumulative add up, if you're bouncing to 10 different pages and you've got to come back, and it's just like when in the front end, when the JS version, you're just like, oh, it's just there, right?
Yeah.
So there, it's not the same in that. But like this is definitely an extreme case. Some of the components, it's an extreme case of where you can do it in a relatively smart way with Htmx and somewhat limited caching. I mean, the system itself, there's some added requirements that like get in the way of things in terms of like if evaluation is completed, none of the assumptions can be edited. There needs to be a track record. You can't change anything after it. Once it's hit this point, it's done. That's just in the system. That's just right. So everywhere that any of that stuff, you have to, is the engagement done? Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what changes were made by who. Those kind of things are important.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of little hiccups that you can run into, but like from a client-facing side, I think that like if I were better at styling, that's probably I have little, if any, I'm like programming
usability versus
I don't want to be worried about like styling too much, but it's a necessity, right? Like the perception of your system is oftentimes, sadly, looked at as, people look at it and get a perception of quality. So that'll probably be a next step. But the functionality stuff is isolated from the front end enough that it's not going to be hard to make some of those changes. There will be a very big change that needs to be made coming forward, moving away from the enterprise sort of clients to individual who's may use the system once in their entire life.
Right. In that case, you need
different level of
focus
intuitive that needs to be there, and hand holding and so on that needs to be there. To date, it's been CFOs of venture-backed companies, like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Generally speaking. So it's pretty simple to have a system that's just like, here's the questions, here's the next section questions, right? Documents, they know what those documents are. They know it's not a big deal. It's going to be very challenging, probably, that step. So we'll see.
Yeah.
we'll
So,
see.
so you mentioned that you had a few tricks that you've kind of whether it's for sort of turning your MPA like an MPA setup into kind of feeling like an SPA. So
Yeah.
like what do you would you remember
Well,
any
so
of
like a
those kind
really
of
simple
offhand?
one, a really simple one is so let's say that I'll use this example, right? So there's a messaging kind of related to an engagement or a client within the system, so that if somebody has an issue, they can send a message within there, right? So
Yeah.
there's a list, there's a standard, no big deal, right? And they're nested and all whatever, right? It's like not a big deal to do that. A lot of people solved that problem long ago on how to design a messaging app. That's not a big deal.
Okay. Yep.
But you could have a bunch of messages, or you could have a bunch of clients. If you're a venture capital firm, you may have 20 companies on the system, right? And we want to see status of where all of those are within a list, right?
Okay.
That's the client looking to their last valuation. What's the status of the valuation, so we know, right? So there's like some information there for them on that. It's got to do some looking around to do
Yep.
that. So it's not like you're going to click on the client or the companies tab and go right there. There's going to be a lag of however long all of that is determined. Is the engagement completed or not? What's the status? What's the progress percentage? All of that takes a while.
Right.
Can't browser cache that
Right. Has to be
because that
immediate.
list is defined. It's totally fine if you want to browser cache a page where you're doing the same modification request too. That'll invalidate in the browser, fine, right? Whatever you return will just be the new cache.
Yeah.
Well, a list that's dependent upon all these other sections.
Yeah. 7 other tables that you're checking the updated,
Yeah.
timestamps and all this stuff.
Yeah, so I have a cool little caching thing in Redis that I did to overcome that in like a
Okay.
super easy way. But so what I do is I send just a shell back, browser cache the shell of the page
Yep.
with an Htmx load when that shell hits. So it's
Gotcha.
loading from the cache the inner pieces of that, but it's just sending back the shell, which is browser cache. That's not dependent upon anybody or a user or whoever. It's the same for everybody.
Yep.
So now they bounce to once that shell's been in the browser cache, you hit the tab to go to companies, you go right there. And then there's just a loading state as you bring in, you're not lagging to a page.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Yeah.
and it's just like a super small little, just send back the shell of what I want to show in terms of just the header, and it'll be the same for everybody. And then within there, have just your loading state with a HTMX get to wherever you're going, and just replace the loading state
Yep.
with the list.
Interesting.
And yeah, so it was you can bounce around just like an SPA to those pages, and
Yep.
but you don't. Unlike an SPA, once that's been loaded, it's not in. So you're always waiting for the loading, but it's it's like 120 milliseconds from the cache, something like that, 100 milliseconds from the cache. So it's not long.
Yeah. So one thing that that sounds like a good setup. That reminds me. So I just did something with a modal recently, where it was the same sort of deal. It's like I'm reusing the same modal over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And you want it to pop up with specific data that could take a little while, to generate, but because it's about your specific row.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that same setup that you just talked about, but rather than doing it, you have the modal has the outer part, that's the same everywhere. So that pops up no matter what.
The logic for closing the whole thing, it's tied to,
That's all front end. So, that's immediate. And then I actually put the trigger to load that data inside the modal on a mouse enter for the tab. Something like that also is just a possibility, where it's okay, now we can, that nice little bit of time where it takes you to click, you can subtract that from your negative, from your
I do
milliseconds
that.
too.
So there's a lot of Like, so if somebody wants to contact us within the questionnaire, there's like a, help on sections, and I can even show it, I don't mind. But there's a drawer that comes out with specifics to contact us, right? Well, that's a mouse
Right.
over. That's a mouse over,
Nice.
and that's a specific, that's browser cache, because that's only going to come under one request type. It's
Yep.
just like, it's going to always look the same. So it's a
Nice.
mouse over, grabs it real quick, they click it, like over, it just is like right there.
Yeah.
I did that a lot with anything that's not dependent on a lot of other factors, like other
Right.
pages and so on, where it's very hard to invalidate browser cache. I preload that if it's client facing, and and cache the hell out of it.
Yep. So did you get into the headers of HTML? I'm trying to remember. I couldn't see a specific tweet on this, but this is something that I almost never use, although, on the podcast I've talked about it. But just realistically in my apps, I haven't really needed to check the headers on stuff that often. But just I know that you kind of went in pretty deep on almost every aspect of HTMX as far as I
Well,
can
the
tell.
trigger, so example, like one page, sub page, there will even more than that, even within the questionnaire. So if there was like more than one dependent dropdown, I sort of just said, I'm not doing that on the front end. Like, I'm just not going to have a giant crazy hyperscript. Like, if unchanged from this element, if the value is this, then like I just wasn't going to do it, right?
Yep.
And I like refuse to use Alpine, just not because I don't like Alpine, but if I'm going to use Alpine, I might as well use Vue. In my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah.
So I have like dependent fields that will fetch on a change from another field, and it will come back and select. Well, the backend is watching the trigger from where that was to know what partial to return.
Interesting. Okay.
So like you change from like, no, we have that as an example or whatever. That'll trigger the fill-in below it. That'll signal a request, and the trigger will be that select field, which will then just fill in, send back like 3 related fields that need to be completed. So there's some of that, which is kind of nice, like one giant page, one giant HTML file with like 5 or 6 partials that are just listening for different triggers.
Right.
If there is no trigger. If there is no trigger, I know it's coming. It's a full, right? If it's that whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of.
Well, that's kind of nice. So like a lot of server sent events on the back end.
You use server sent events on the back end?
Not server sent events, sorry, but like reswaps and HX reswap, HX retarget.
Yep.
So if there's error, send back a notification, right, at the bottom, like those kind of things, instead of sending that, just send that and throw that beforehand to the body.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of that. Yeah, the logic. I mean, there's a crap load of validation. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, as there should be with something that's
validating against
this kind of data.
So like you get your quote online, you answer a certain way, that has to be validated that you respond that way in the questionnaire, right? And then that's just beyond just the validation of the whole questionnaire, right? So it's like I think there's well over 5,000 lines of validation related components just on the back end for that. Like different, because there's just a lot of, much easier to, it may look, I know it looks prettier when you have it in a transition group on the front end in Vue and it just like slides around all pretty. But guess what? You're doing that there to make it look pretty. And you're also doing it here to make it look to make sure
To
it's
make it
correct,
accurate. Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, that is something so many times it seems like you have to duplicate some stuff if you are trying to do a lot of validation on the client side.
Yeah, like I would send all the choice fields forward on an option request at the page and preload those. So that I always made sure that, like, let's say the full attorney list that we have of options, like, because we ask who your attorney is, who your accountant is, because we can learn information on, because they have different, how they present your financials or whatever.
Oh, really?
So it's like, yeah, like that granular, right? Like
Yeah.
how, like, then that's a criteria that could be used. Like your attorney's Goodwin Proctor. Okay, let's look at all the other Goodwin Proctors as a proxy to help maybe, right, the system.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
Another
sense.
variable.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like we store for every single line. So there's a financial statement for a year, and there's 600 and something possible financial statement items, depending on the type. Like those are all separate within the database. But we store where your data in your financial statement was in terms of row position in your statement. Was it a child or a parent? Was it like nested or not? So that's all information that then the system can look at later as it learns, right? To like,
Hmm.
well, if it's a parent, I know I can ditch all the children, right? Like it lets it like eliminate choices, which can get better results. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like that validation stuff gets crazy when you're trying to replicate on the front end. So there are some really tremendous benefits. I really need to get into Vue Transition, the Vue Transitions API, if I want to really make it free.
Yeah. I've been
Um,
feeling that too, where it's like I know this is out there and I have not gotten into it yet. But I mean, it just seems the promise of it is just so good, right? Like if you
yeah,
know if you want to sort of add that and you're already using this approach of swapping in HTML snippets, the Vue transitions promise of being able to just smoothly, I was talking to Jason Cross the other day. He mentioned that it was actually doing like a bitmap,
yeah,
like pixel to pixel
yeah.
before and after, which is
Yeah.
not at all my image of how that would work. Like,
Well, that's
so that's
so I have
surprising.
like I use the within HTMX I have the global transitions on,
Yeah.
but because in the app there's actually the target's not not the body for the preserve
Okay.
target because there's just a lot going on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's like an actual sidebar like that, the whole thing. So I could probably redo the whole layout, but I wouldn't want to redo like 80 different pages. Like that's
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
crazy the whole thing would get into. So like now we're down the path. But I have it on, but I have the time set basically to 0.
Gotcha.
So funny what it does though is it prevents jitter. There's no jitter
Oh, nice. Okay.
because it's still on.
Yep.
It's still looking at it, but it's just not delaying the swap because it messes up the sidebar on the global because it still kind of does
Okay.
the whole thing, even though this doesn't change, let's say. Um, so that was kind of a cool little. If I
That's a
turn it
little.
off, it's
That's a
like,
nice little tip.
yeah,
I like
just
that.
turn it on and set it to 0 if you want to feel like an SPA. It's just like
Interesting.
there's some little things you'll have to like work within there on transitions on things that are very dramatically different. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it works on a pretty good global scale. That's for sure.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
And I would highly recommend the preload, the
What do you,
prefetch
a prefetch?
extension.
Okay.
Like back to that, like I cannot tell you how many, when there's like a client, like there's a list of files to upload
Yep.
and there's like an upload, these are required, this is not whatever, but like upload, hover over, that's grabbed. So by the time I do it, it's like immediate drawer to like drag and drop their file and so on. Like it just
Nice.
makes the like when you have when your view or whatever is only returning one state of the world,
Yeah.
browser cache that, have your endpoint be the exact same, put or post to that endpoint, browser cache it, and do a prefetch it. Like it just makes things like, I don't have a single client-side rendered modal or drawer or anything. It's all backend.
Wow, interesting. So when you say
Using that
prefetch,
technique.
is this an extension? You said the prefetch.
Oh yeah. Let me see what it is real quick.
Because I really haven't used the extensions much. I'm hoping to kind of get into them. I would probably do like a mouse enter, but if there's an easier way to do that, I'm all about it.
Yeah, it's one of the like the class tools and preload. I think it is just it's a preload extension. So I use within the app, other than the couple of extensions I wrote, just for specific use cases, and I'm like so overwhelmed in terms of my time, but like I still owe Carson like an essay, and I'm just like, I'm such a it's just like, I really
that'll be the last thing I ask you about in a few minutes here. I would love to hear about that essay, but anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, like it's all about these so the head support extension.
Okay.
A lot.
So you can swap out up at the top easily?
Primarily for JS files or for things that I'm not going to use all throughout the app, right?
Gotcha.
Certain things need to be preloaded because there's other factors that are like, other things are sort of dependent upon those are always going to be used or whatever. But like some of my own like input formatting for like comma, like numbers, and so make them like usable, like nice.
And just to be clear, this is the ability basically to add stuff into the head tag.
To merge it, you can define the strategy you want to merge it, and use I think it's an HX. Hold on, I've got the file. I think it's HX preserve. Set it to true.
Okay, yeah. Preserve.
And that'll keep everything you have in your. And the other ones will just be merged onto there.
Nice.
And if they're already there, they won't be adjusted. But you just define your strategy, and so if it's a full page reload, I have it because I'll have like a page HTML and then a page partial HTML, and this one fits, like feeds into there. But on this one, I'll have like the general stuff, right, like the head and so on. And I'll just include that as extra items if there's extra JS files I need for that page. And then I'll have, if it's an HTMX request, then throw this header info on there. Merge
so you're using both the built-in header, you're checking the built-in headers that are coming back, and using the head extension to add JS files or whatever other includes you might need.
Depending on how depending on how, there were some reasons why I forgot. Yeah, I know there's a method to my madness normally. And if I go back,
don't doubt it.
That seems stupid, but then I take it out. I'm like, it's not working now. There was a method.
yeah.
That's how everything works. You're like, you go with some crazy code, and you're like, this is ludicrous. What were you doing? You try to rewrite it, and you're like, oh, that wasn't ludicrous. Now I understand what you were doing.
Yeah, over time you begin to respect more and more the gigantic ludicrous things. You're like,
you get into a certain space where you have clarity into everything going on, and when you look at it from the outside, when you have none of that clarity, you're just like, this is a monstrosity of craziness. What are you doing? Yeah. So I'm using so the head support, class tools, and the preload extension.
Okay.
And the preload one allows you just to define like mouse over. I think the default is like, but it's not as I'm like not the most aggressive and not the least aggressive.
Okay.
Because partially I can prefetch items because there's a very well-defined progression through the system, which affords some luxuries, right? That you can, like what I would say is if you have well-defined process, you can take advantage of going and grabbing things because there's a significantly high probability they're going to go to there, or they have to go there as a next step. So you can kind of just make the experience even better. Certainly, if it's a big if it's, the request is going to be intensive, you can go grab it either on I think they have an init on that. So when that just page loads with that preload extension defined on a specific thing, it'll just grab that route the minute you come to the page.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually have that on the marketing site for one page, which is the quote, go get your quote page. So they hit that and it's like, you're right there.
Yeah. You don't want any delay right there.
Well, it's also it's grabbing all the options, all the, valuation types and the cost, all of those things. So it's, I don't want to be like lag to go to like the critical entry point.
Yeah. Nice.
So that's like the one that there's a prefetch, the rest are mouse overs, but those are browser cached anyway. So I'm not worried about I'm not scared of a few requests.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I can tell you've put a lot of thought into the architecture of this.
Probably way too much.
Well, that's what it's all about. That's why we're here. You got to build something good.
Thought into most of these things. I tend to be somebody who kind of always thinks about like the edge case, unfortunately. And I mean, I think if I hadn't found program, it's not very good in the rest of your life, but it works well in programming.
Yeah, it's a little bit of seeing the future. That's kind of how I think of it sometimes when I'm when I'm working on a site. I'm like, what if they do this? And you sort of just know it's gonna happen at some point.
Yeah, like the idea of if you're already in building something, right? Like you might as well just go in a little deeper. Going as deep as you reasonably can, given what you know, is kind of my take.
Right.
Don't try to plan don't assume you're never going to rewrite it at some level, but going as deep as you can with what you know now, should kind of always be I don't tend to want to write things just to get it done. Also, I don't work for somebody else, so it's probably some of that too.
Yeah, it's going to come back to bite you. And that's,
it's
like if you do something half-assed.
Who wrote this crap? Oh, no.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, the mouse over on the preload extension with modals and drawers and things like that are because there's just a single endpoint where you're getting or modifying it to one endpoint would abuse that like crazy. I just use it. It makes such a difference in terms of it allows me not to have any, there's not like I said, a single drawer or modal that's served from the front end.
Yeah.
It's all from the back end.
I mean, it's efficient too, because you don't have that sitting in your DOM. I mean, maybe you have the shell of it or something like that, but the actual full data, you just don't need to load that in the beginning, and you also don't miss it.
None of it. It's all I don't have it. Yeah, there's not a single piece that's. I think. Well, the only thing that's there is a logout confirmation little thing that's there, but that's in a component, a web component that I did, and it's just cloned in when it happens and. Because I wanted that to be sort of fast. I didn't want that to be a back request, and I wasn't going to preload a logout.
There's no need for it to be.
It's kind of weird. It would also just, I think, create some weird issues anyway. So that's the only one.
That's true.
It's like you're pre-logged out. Yeah. You can't really do that. You can't really do that. But everything else, I would highly recommend that, and I think the Htmx trigger.
Yeah,
makes your life really cool because you can just return a different partial based on what element is. I think you have to have an ID on it though, is the only thing on that element, so that can get a little weird.
Are you saying HX target? You mean right? The header?
No. There's hold on, I'm gonna look at one real quick. Hold on. So the worst part of this whole thing is I know where all of these things are within this whole thing. Isn't that weird how you can?
Yeah. You have a map of God knows how many lines of code somewhere in your
Like
head.
something breaks within this giant monstrosity of chaos, and I know exactly where it's broken. Like pretty much like 99% of the time. And it's like
Yeah.
my wife is like, no wonder you don't have any time for me. I'm like, totally. Like I'm just like I have no more bandwidth. It's all stored up with where all these things are.
You can
Yeah,
like walk people through your app on the phone. And you're just like, all right,
totally.
you're gonna click this, you're gonna see this, now you're
Oh,
gonna get to
totally.
this.
Totally. Okay, so I'm trying to find the header real quick here.
So I'm thinking it must have been HX target only because you were saying that it has you have an ID and then
It's the
it's
trigger.
gonna match your
Yeah, it's the
target.
trigger.
Is it the trigger? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So targets. So I think I maybe Carson will 100% know this. I'd have to look it real quick, but that's what my code says, and it works perfectly.
Nice.
You have to have an ID on the element though, and if you do, the element of that ID name is sent with a request.
Okay. Yep. Yep. I gotcha.
So now they'll just be if. So first it will look if there's a trigger at all,
Yep.
and then you just define your triggers logic. Like if it's this, else that, right? If it's this, return this. And it makes it like kind of cool.
Yeah, so that's one I remember I even did an episode of podcast on it, but it was so long ago. And the thing is, I just haven't used those. So it's, it doesn't stick until I'm actually having to use them like that. But yeah, I mean, that gives you a lot of flexibility. You can know where this came from. What's the context that this snippet needs to be returned?
Yeah, and I'm definitely sending back a lot of events with different things to trigger different things.
Yeah.
So like listen, like send like table data event, right? Like to the front end and listen on in Hyperscript for the event, which is where Hyperscript is excessively gorgeous.
Interesting.
It's just it's designed. I mean, it's just Carson, of course, would know more
We're
about
both,
this,
so it
but
makes sense.
it appears to me that it is like fundamentally designed around like listening for events are like one of its like super strong factors. So just having something sitting there listening for an event from the body, sending
Yep.
that back, and handle the transition to the table view because the data is going to be there, right? Is like super nice
Nice.
and fairly easy to. I mean, as easy as if I hear that like these things aren't maintainable, again, I'm gonna like lose it because I'm like, there's there's
Yeah.
no there's no giant app in the world that is like easily maintainable.
Right. As because it's like by the nature of these things, they should be complicated. But like that doesn't mean it's like you got to save your complexity for where it matters.
Yeah.
Just kind of my opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, sort of keeping things as simple as possible in the HTML and on your front end state and all this kind of stuff has just like I've reaped the benefits of it, and it's only been a year, and I kind of expect to continue reaping those benefits the
I
more
think you
time.
can build some really solid patterns that you just
Yeah.
use consistently to make like a good experience, and that's where I think having a single HTML file for a page with partials.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a giant maybe if you don't like a big context window, I like a big context window in terms of like what's going
Yeah.
on. I have this is an exact representation of what I'm seeing on the page. Is like a kind of nice thing instead of oh yeah, I've got this like reusable component over here that I'm importing 400 things from the component file, folder on my front end app, and like, what is this doing again? And I like the idea of it all just being in one place. There's huge benefits to that.
Yeah.
So that with partials and triggers are like can just like a consistent and sending events from the back end like that to do something when there's a successful event or whatever, and you want to show a different. You want to hide something when there's something's going to come back, right? You can like
Yeah.
trigger a transition of that when the event happens, and then swap it in. So there's like some nice little things you can do.
Yeah. So, all right. So, I mean, I'll just, I don't want to take too much of your time
Yeah.
here. But if you have, do you have a few more minutes just
Mhm.
to, so, this is kind of an incredible, like large scale app that you're building. I don't, this is probably just in terms of different people I've spoken to on the podcast. This is definitely in the larger scale. And also like you've gone deep on some HTMX stuff. So if, just from my perspective, anything that I'm sure people would be interested to see anything that you're willing to share. I know this is a private kind of app and stuff like that, but some of those tips and tricks, like, I think are awesome to see. And, if there's anything like that, little snippets and stuff like that you come across, what in the vein of that, what's your sort of, what's the angle, or maybe you don't know yet, of the essay that you sort of talked about, someday, putting together for the HTMX
Oh,
site?
dude, it's like I think it's like 100% like love hate.
Nice.
There are, like I said, there are pieces where the HTMX version of the exact same thing like outshines.
Yep.
And I think I tweeted something about this, like as a what may appear to be like little things, little little features that aren't material features that you can just easily add that you can't so easily add because you don't have that data or whatever, right, in the front end.
Right.
But the things you can, just the culmination of those just little things you can add, those add up to then be material.
Yep.
So I think that kind of love hate of when you're trying to do really big calculations and you don't want to redo those, and I just think, and you have to get into cache stuff just to make it functional.
Yep.
That sucks. And that's when I like want to burn the whole thing down, like 100%.
Gotcha.
But then
These
I
are
would
temporary
miss,
calculations.
yeah, and then I would miss
Yep.
all those like easy wins. Like there's just so many easy wins with HTMX, right? Like there's a
Right.
single source of validation, right? And most of the responses, like they're so fast on sections that I don't even worry about validating really on the front end, other than like this feels required or not
Right.
required, toggling that kind of thing, and just do it. It's super fast, right? And again, I'm not scared of requests. Like that's not a big deal. Like, whatever. Well, even at scale, we're not going to be we're going to like invert the thing largely, right? Is that per user, they're more valuable. We don't need a lot of users to be valuable versus like a Facebook where it's like they're not valuable per user. They need a ton of users. So they run into volume and scale and all those things.
Yeah.
So it's not an issue on my mind. Like keep just requests all day long. Who cares, right?
Facebook's not doing the sort of calculations that you're doing either.
Yeah, and I mean they're doing some stuff on the back end for sure, but I think a lot of that's like pre-calculated and so on. And a lot of ours are dynamic in a sense,
Right.
which is a little bit more challenging. I think we can move a little more to pre-calculated later as the system gets better. Then it's just kind of like a later validation,
Yeah.
right? Which would be super nice.
Yep.
And if it does, I have no idea. I don't know how many clients who need the system goes, oh, I know how to do this now. I have no idea. Or if it's possible, I don't know. We'll see.
Yep.
But yeah, those easy wins, that would definitely be the like trade-off from like day to day. Like you go try to do something, and sometimes I'll just be like, oh, I'm going to just write this in the JS frame. Or other times I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't want to have to go get all that data, send that forward, rewrite all the interface, all the types need to be, because it won't compile because it's all in TypeScript, and now it's not matching, and that doesn't exist. Like, I don't want to deal with that. And then I'm like, I'm going to go write the HTMX one.
Yeah.
At some point, we got to do a break here, because the maintaining of all of it is not a good thing. So I think the next big thing, and probably something I would suggest for people that are going to get into where you're really swapping hard into the DOM, which is HTMX, you're just slamming into the DOM. The Vue transitions API, like I need to really dig into that and probably
Well,
write
I
a
mean,
little package to dynamically do what I want to do when to where I want and so on. And I think that can be done. And maybe that would be a really nice thing for people to be able to use, because I think that being able to define that transition where you want it easily within Vue transitions, within the Vue transitions API, I think would be like, I think it's just the polish that is what is probably the limiting factor.
interesting. Yeah. And I mean, with the Vue transitions, like I said, I haven't really gotten into them yet. They're still relatively new. And that's sort of one of those things that now that it's in the browser, like it's only going to get better. So I think leaning into that as like the future, way to sort of approach that feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, I forgot what that recent thing with also that has been an Htmx for a while, and I looked at it and saw a person's tweet on it with like the move before or whatever, like whatever that feature was that was finalized now in Chrome or whatever. There's little things like that that are super nice.
Yeah,
they're super nice. I would love to see a little more selective ability to invalidate browser cache if you're on the same domain. If you are the one, that would be a super nice feature. If you wanted to see some
interesting,
real not just nuke the whole thing with clear browser, clear site history or whatever I forget what it is. It's just kind of like clear the cache, clear the cookies, clear everything, boom, right? And that doesn't work, but I know you can with the there's a response location, I think, whatever header, and I think you can define what the route is a representation of that, but to be able to do it at like some larger scale would be really great.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like I know that the way that move before got in, and like credit to Carson Gross on this one for just like, I feel like I never in my life would have thought to just ask the browser company for something, like, or maybe they reached out to him. I don't know what it was, but it's like, if you have stuff like that, like I don't care about not that I don't care, but I just haven't come across the need to do a lot of like clearing the user's cache for the browser and updating it and killing it. I mean, every now and then I'm forced to do that, but it's like, you have to do it.
We could maybe go with like the PC sell to them, right? Like the like eco sell to them, right? That if more people are able to browser cache, there's less resources being used on the server.
Over the networks. I mean, the scale.
The server's not rerunning something unless it really has to, right? So it's kind of a nice, like, maybe, I don't know.
I like that angle.
I don't know if that's the hill I'm going to die on, though.
I'm sold. Yeah.
I'm actually pretty certain I won't die on that hill.
Yeah. But it'd be nice if someone does.
I would just really love to see some ability to be a little more granular. And like I said, the service workers would be fine, but now you're basically invalidating, you're writing a bunch of JavaScript to invalidate what you want to invalidate. It defeats the point. I mean, I hooked him up for a day just because, like, I sent a tweet, I'm like, I'm not doing this. And then, like, next thing you know, that afternoon, I'm like, I'm going to throw some service workers on there just for the hell of it. And I'm like, whoa, this is so fast.
Really? Okay.
No, it's insanely fast because it's just using the cache API front end. And it's like insanely fast, but you still run into the same thing. Like I'm already invalidating on the back end. Why do I need to now deal with it again on the front end and validate it? Like it's like, come on.
Yeah.
It's the same.
And that's another one of those edge cases. Is as you grow, maybe that becomes more necessary eventually, but not something to worry about too much right now.
No, and I've said this too. I think that if you're really solving a fundamental problem or a problem that people really care about, they're going to give you way more leeway on everything else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? True. So like Craigslist. It's like the greatest example of just like the worst but most amazing website.
Yeah. They somehow managed to keep Web 1.0 and be extremely useful, and nobody cares. No, I mean, in fact, people probably prefer it in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's super intuitive. There's no weirdness. It doesn't feel. This is the last thing I'm saying about these things. Is JS frameworks the outcomes are very pretty. I'm talking like a fat client, right? Like
Yeah.
a big, giant, fat client. They're really pretty, and you can make them like super elegant. But there's a sense of fragility to them, at least from my standpoint. Like things just feel a little like you could slam it with something and it would break, right?
Yeah.
And it is about right. You could slam it with something and it would break. But like the Htmx version, yeah, it's like slower and it's a little clunkier, but like it's like a, you know, solid old pickup truck, you know?
Yeah. I sometimes, just when I'm developing my own stuff, I sometimes think of it as what I'm building is almost like a magazine page. Like, I don't want anything jumping around. I don't want anything moving. I don't want anything that feeling of fragility that I think you're describing. Like, to me, there's something, when you get a server rendered HTML page back, it just feels so solid. And that's an experience for myself and hopefully for other people, because it's something I care about, that they appreciate too.
Well, here would be like a great example, right? So headless UI, great like package that I use on the front end. So the autocomplete, great, right?
Yeah.
Problem is that if the lists are large, if you have a very large list in an autocomplete, and JavaScript is re-rendering that every time it moves what's into view, right? It's not like it's just sitting there and it's kind of like, and it bogs. It's terrible, right? I send the same in just the HTML dropdown. It's just an HTML dropdown. Everything's fully rendered. And you just like zoom through there because the browser's like, this is just HTML.
Yeah.
It's not being so there's like little things like that where you're like, if your list is big enough, like it's weird if it's gonna, because like they don't want to render the whole thing. I don't know how I have to look at. Actually, I don't want to look at their code to see what's going on. Honestly,
it's just funny that you mentioned that. Yeah. I had a small interaction today with I don't really know the guy, but Dax, who's on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah.
And I had a little interaction with him today where he's saying like, I'm so sick of virtual scrolling, like you can't Command F, and it's like, I responded with something like, yeah, like it's like it's so much easier to just use strict HTML, and then there's basically no limit to your scrolling. You don't have to use virtual scrolling. I've never, I was kind of a surprise to me. I've never seen like too much HTML where a normal browser just can't handle it. Like you have to go unbelievably large, larger than a human would sort of want to ever use to be able to do that. And, I think he was kind of like, well, what do you mean? Like, obviously the browser can't handle it at some point. It's like there's like he said I'm hitting limits, and I was like, I don't know what your setup is, but if you're hitting limits, I'm guessing you're using a virtual DOM. That's just like there's no other way.
Yeah. So what you'll do is you try to do use like a virtualization library within that list.
Yeah, which
to make it a smaller rendered amount because it's looping over every time there's a movement. It's like you can just see it just like jacking up. So
you're adding to your overhead for your client side, and that ultimately slows it down.
It just speaks to like the solid, right? Yeah. Like I can tell you, like if you try to scroll too fast, it like doesn't keep. You got to like tab through it, right?
Yeah.
Well, the HTML version, like the one that I've got, like just return just the drop down in HTML as just like an absolute position, like just boom right there. It looks just like it. It literally like you can just like do whatever the hell you want on that thing. And
browsers are ridiculous. Like they can render HTML like kind of to an unbelievable amount these days.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's. Yeah, I don't know what the limit is, but I don't think there is a limit, honestly.
Yeah. All right, so. I mean, anything else you kind of want to plug or mention or anything like that while you're here?
No, let me just see. I'm prone to being all over the place, so I'm trying to see. Yeah, I talked about the browser cache kind of challenges, sadly. the clear site data, that's, just if you have dynamic data, like the browser caching is tough.
Yeah.
Just unless it's only changing on a single endpoint, you're going to run into problems. At least that's what I've run into. And I'm sure if there's people that can, and there are vastly more knowledgeable people than I am about this stuff.
About building large-scale apps with HTMX, I wouldn't say there's that many.
Well, there's probably, look, I guarantee there's people that would look at certain things, like that's just the nature of it. Like would look at certain things and go, you could do this better than this. You could, and like I said, there's probably ways I could rework it. I was literally trying to get is like, if I was going to move from a very cool SPA,
Yeah.
it was a lot of time into, I was going to try to get it as close as I could to an SPA.
Yeah.
That was my bar. I didn't have to do it. Right. So I chose to do it. So that's why it took time to try to do things like, and it's not the SPA, but it's like close enough for me in a lot of ways. And I think over the next, as time permits, right? Like there's mission critical stuff and then there's like not mission critical stuff. I think over the next 4 to 6 months, I would love to see just the APIs related to the admin SPA just sort of going away.
Yeah. Why have two setups like that? And sounds like you've gained a lot of the sort of having it be close to the database and close to the back end while you're there kind of gives you a lot of extra power.
Yeah, I really think I will say that the real determination, I think that the admin side will be HTMX long term, just because of, figuring out some of the big calculation caching. Like it doesn't have to be like a super fast caching. It can be down, like I can be a little smart about things and not have to worry about performance critical other than just resource critical. That's fine. I think that'll happen. I think the big determination will be from the client side will be if I'm able to really get into and understand the transitions. Make things smoother and just a better experience. I think that'll be a big piece. And to be honest, if I never get the full, if I just, the client component is always a JavaScript framework, and that's the only JavaScript framework, and it's a fraction of the whole thing, it's a huge win. Huge win. And what I can do is mock up things in HTMX, get the whole thing worked out exactly how I want it to be in HTMX, where you can just go grab whatever you want and have a very well-defined setup that then defines the API response. That's a really good way to kind of do it too, right?
Yeah.
It's like work out exactly what you want, all the data you're going to need, all the little interactions you want, and then once you have it nailed down pretty well, it's easy to transfer it over to an API then. If that's what you need to do from a pure client side.
Interesting.
Just depending on depending on how your setup is.
Yeah, and I'll put this one out there just because I've been thinking about it a lot. Have you looked at DataStar at all for sort of front end SPA like behavior, but you're controlling it from the back end?
Yeah. So my take is I don't think it solves my fundamental problems with HTMX, if there are problems with HTMX, or I shouldn't say problems, I should say challenges. It's still data coming back from the back end.
It's still back end.
It still has to
be the issue you have.
I still have to figure out the usability component of big calculations that I can, again, just run once and share them around as needed for different things, right? To look at everything.
Yeah, because you don't have that need for them to be on the back end necessarily.
It's not
they can work on the client side if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I'm happy to show like a couple of things if you want, just like what I was talking about. Like, it's not that it all has to be broken up like these, like the calculations, because again, like some of them are, they all require the same data coming in, and there's a lot of they're interrelated in terms of what they need and how they're calculated. It just becomes a bit of a challenge if you're returning all of that to HTML, navigating through 20 different possible tabs, where all those keeping track of that without like an Alpine JS or something. Like that would, I could do it easier in Alpine, at least probably more maintainable. Could just have an object at the top with, that, here's the count we're on or whatever, right, view we're on, and
you can define all your variables and then only client side, and that's fine. Like that's like perfectly.
Like and maybe if you are doing something really intensive like that, that maybe I would suggest don't be stupid like me and just use Alpine. I just was like, again, not that I don't like Alpine, and Caleb, I think that he's a super smart guy in terms of JS, like hands down. I just saw the new thing he wrote for Flux or whatever, like 2.0 or whatever. I'm like, Laravel, man. Laravel.
Yeah, Livewire is fun. Livewire is going to get some good stuff going on.
So, but I just wanted to see how far I could get with like the minimal requirements. Right.
Yeah, which is awesome, and I think you'll be well served by that. That's my impression.
Yeah, like I said, regardless of like the outcome, like long term of what, if there were 2 JS apps still out of this, what has been learned and the better the system is because of it, like things have to be very well defined on the back end when there's no like stored state out in the front end. You can kind of make like a bunch of changes to things and send those all back and whatever. The back end, like this specific view, it only knows that. And this, right? So like things have to be, it requires much more defining and a structure, and I think just a much better software and scalability from that standpoint. Things have to be much more structured than they do in sort of just go, like I said in a couple of tweets, like the JS hammer, just go fix everything out front if you want to, right? You can do that really easily. You don't have to be as disciplined about sort of
where
like
you get your
real
data.
structure, right? Like,
yeah,
like in one thing, like we didn't know all the questions that we want to ask at first, right? So really defining a model with all the questions and not having like endless migrations later on and so on. So there was like a JSON field to start, right? Because it highly just like figured out as we went along, as that it kind of coincided along with the Htmx rewrite, that all got like super well defined, and it had to be. Because you're not going to go like deal with JSON within form fields and so on in a back-end HTML world. It's just, but like to the front end, it doesn't know the difference. It's JSON. It's like, this is my native language.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just like, I think you just get much further along in terms of like setting a solid structure than, at least that's just my take, especially when things get long.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's just kind of this independent world. There's a collective universe, but everything's its own little, I think in the JS world, you can get very like, oh, it's all here, right? And I'm just going to modify things around and then send back some big giant mess of something. I may not be right, but it's kind of my like kind of feel on how it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you've built stuff with it, and so it's like, I think you have some experience with it where it's like, I mean, that's my experience too, is it does feel, because you're pulling data, from a JSON, instead of just having this page, which has the data it needs, you might have this page that's totally separate, independent from the 7 places you might be getting data. So you put that into the back end and you're sort of thinking of it from there. Yes, you're pulling 7 pieces of data, but you've got that all in one place in your back end calls. You're directly at the database, so there's no network charge for each bit of data. So anyway, that's sort of how I build apps as well. So for me, there's a clear benefit.
Yeah, it just had to be much more, again, like forced out to be much more defined. Like things were very well defined. Well, I wouldn't say very well defined. There were certain sections that were uncertain. And
Yeah.
there had to be like a definitive, like, we're certain on this piece right now, which was in the long run, like I said, regardless if it's used or not, like was a huge benefit.
Right.
And even just like the mocking up of being able to like I said, like design exactly what you want things to look like, and if it's not pretty enough or whatever, you don't feel it's like whatever, you have a you now like the process of moving that to something else to like a API endpoint is like minuscule.
Right. You've got the whole thing right there, so
So
you
like
can
I can
always
build
change
something in
that.
a day that's like soup got everything I want. Maybe it's not all refined, and like 2 days later, I have like this super refined front end piece now because I didn't have to rethink any. This is all done.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there are like, yeah, I don't know, big benefits all the way. And
Nice.
Hyperscript.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, this is awesome. And I really appreciate you taking the time to
Yeah,
kind of talk through. I mean, I know you've been working on this for a while and
yeah,
just have gone really deep. And I really appreciate you, talking through some of it and giving
yeah,
some of the tips and whatnot.
yeah. I'm happy. I mean, if I'm happy to show some. I think I've.
Yeah, I generally like to keep it so that the folks listening on the audio podcast can appreciate it.
Yeah,
But I mean, maybe if you're interested in it, or if there's a possibility, maybe we could do something with kind of specific code snippets at some point.
yeah,
If that would be, if you'd be down for
yeah.
that, like I would love that
Well, I
to
think.
kind of see some of the
I
details.
mean, I tend to get over ambitious about most things.
Yeah,
It's about that essay because I really want to like almost have like some like examples of why love and hate sort of exist, like some
yeah,
tangible, like you see this here, how easy this was to do and how annoying this was to do, and vice
hmm
versa. um, I think
I
are
think the side by side. I don't know how many big apps there are out there that have that capability that sort
yeah,
of you've done here, where you actually, basically had built the whole thing already, and now you're recreating it. That's like the Rosetta Stone here of like HTMX. So I think that's super cool and could
yeah,
have some
it is
some
actually like
benefits.
super hilarious because I think like 2 days ago I had both open in local development, and I was looking at both in live development too, in live
Yep.
in production. So I had four of the same tabs open, um, and like you can, there's like subtle, like I know that like there's subtle little differences of things that I was like, this isn't important in the HTMX version right now. There's some
Yeah.
subtle little differences. So yes, it is hilarious. So yeah, I definitely think that that would be that's kind of where I'm leaning towards. I think the component side was like a huge annoyance.
Yeah.
Certainly been it's I've learned tremendous,
Yeah. That's awesome.
tremendous. Like so, it's been positive either way.
All
Yeah.
right.
I would suggest everybody do something like crazy in HTML to
Yeah.
see, right?
But yeah, definitely. Well, it's like if you have an idea, you just sometimes you just got to go for it, and
And
that's where you're gonna
the
learn.
end of it is like I said, right? Like the transition. If build it in HTMX, see how far it gets you.
All right.
The transition once you've defined everything, it takes a second. The reverse was really hard, actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like yeah, the process, the data, like what was needed in something was like, but it was really hard with like it's just a significantly different to go from a JS framework to HTMX. I found it much harder with all the complications. But
Right.
just to like send your like to you could have your API done in a day if you have well-defined views on what data you want for a specific section.
Right. Well, I mean,
Just
you're ultimately
load
you're working in
HTMX.
HTML,
What's that?
so you're working in HTML, so it's like ultimately your browser wants HTML. So if you've built the whole thing in HTML, that's one of the benefits of HTMX in my
Yeah.
mind.
I mean,
It's like,
I just think like, I, if I had known about it like years ago, and it had
yeah,
probably been a little like where it is now years ago, I would have definitely I would have definitely started with that with HTMX as its default.
right,
And then if I ran into where there were things that were like the look and feel, maybe, or just like technical challenges in terms of size and calculations and so on, then and only then I would go the other side. But it would be
right,
it'd be under the standpoint where I am now, where I'm not compelled to do it. It's a really nice situation where you're not.
right.
This is all assuming that Vue 4 will happen at some point, which it ultimately will. And then there'll be breaking changes, and they'll stop supporting this one a year after that, and then we're going to be forced in that situation. So,
Yeah, I see. So you're planning ahead a little bit here too, with your assuming that things are going to be broken, which they probably will.
I've been burnt. Like that
Yeah,
was really
yeah,
hard. I rewrote the whole thing myself
yeah,
from Vue 2 to Vue 3, the whole thing, and it's like it's not a little. Um, I mean, I think I said something like there's 200 endpoints
wow.
around about, right? It's a lot of endpoints
Yeah, yeah. No,
just
you never
for
want to do
every
that stuff
possible
again.
thing that would be needed to
Never.
do. And I rewrote the whole thing from Vue 2 to Vue 3, and I was like, I'm never doing this again. That's what got me to. That was the willingness to go and like beat my head against the door or the wall for a few months, figuring out the little intricacies of HTMX. Because I'm like,
Yeah,
if I have to do it on a small fraction of that, like fine, like I can live with that. But if I'm forced to do it on the whole thing just to run a business,
yeah. No, I have really big uh, issues every time I have to go back to the things that I still have to support that are in Vue, because I just can't bring them to the. I'm not going to do the rewrite. It's not worth it. This is not my primary app. It's client projects and stuff, and it's like I'm just not going to do it. So I have to go back and I don't think I'm on like Vue 1.7 or something. And it's like
nice.
I'll work with that until I replace it someday when there's like time and money to do it. But it's like I don't ever want to see it again. If they had HTMX back then and I had used it, it would literally be up to date already. So that's like trying to think long term for devs who run their own businesses. Like it feels like a win.
Well, yeah, there's a thing where so the behavior I have now is I know the behavior I'm going to have in however long.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something kind of cool about that.
No,
There's some
definitely.
behaviors I really don't like, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But I know I'm going to have that behavior, right? I'm not going to
Yeah.
open up the app one day and it's like, something is like, or you go to update one dependency, and you're like, oh, well, now it just blew 400 other dependencies out, right?
Yeah.
Package JSON file, and I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I mean, I think the development world's probably gotten a little too presentational focused, where that tends to be like the critical component of like, is it a quality app?
Right.
I wish that would be a little different because it'd probably make life for everybody a lot better. Where we could,
Yeah.
use
Well,
something like
people's
HTMX and it's delivering the quality of the system can probably, in my personal belief, can be better because of the access to all those little tiny things you just wouldn't do in the JS framework. Because you're like, I'm not going to
yeah.
rewrite this whole setup. Well, not the whole setup, but these APIs and this, these types on the front end and so on, just to add this little thing. But again, you do that like 100 times. It's a materially different system.
Yeah,
So I do
absolutely.
think that it makes better systems when you're dealing solely on the back end. It's the presentation is harder.
All right.
Yeah.
And hopefully not, hopefully that gap is getting smaller, between the two, with stuff like view transitions and other things. So, I think
Yeah,
it's
I'd love to try to help do my part on that because I think from the component standpoint, HTMX limiters are components, unless you want to use like Shoelace or something like that for web components, which are great, or Daisy, but you can't really do a CDN. So you're going to have a build step because you're not going to get a tree shaking of Daisy, and Daisy's going to be huge with everything.
Okay.
Right. I don't even think the new one. Yes, I don't. The CDN is not shakeable.
Wow. Yeah.
So at least that's my take. They even suggest not to run it in production because
It's like Tailwind CDN. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just getting everything. Right? So components and probably view transitions are the single biggest things to make it like you not knowing the difference between those ones. I know we've been on a while, so I don't want to.
No, I love it. This is this is what I'm here for. I like being able to go deep on HTMX.
Yeah, I definitely would like to. I definitely want to show some people like actual, like that's kind of what got me into wanting to post a few of those things, like showing just some of the actual, like what, like where does that, like I know that Carson was like, well, but like there's like the bar of like where does it like run out? Where are you into a world? Where is that point?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know myself,
How far can you get? And I think I pushed that, like, I butted up against the end of that in a number of cases.
Yep.
Hyperscript in combo with it gets you a little further because of the event-oriented nature of it. You can do, like, manage a bigger kind of DOM setup or Alpine or something like that. You can get away with some stuff a little further. But, like, where is that boundary?
Yeah.
And I've
been trying to find it also, like just trying to push against it, and especially, it's hard to answer because I don't have to build real world apps that are pushing that boundary. Most of the stuff I build, I need to present data to people, and it's not the boundaries that there's no issue there. If you were to move into an aspect of, building apps that are, I don't know, I guess like the stuff that I've kind of thought of as client first is kind of like, let's say a photo editing app, like I'm not going to use HTMX for a photo editing app.
Where there's like actual real front end state is like required. Like,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, and like, I know there are a lot of those, and for some people that's their whole career. That's where they live, and so HTMX doesn't maybe even make any sense, and that's not where I live in my career, so it's harder for me to conceptualize what some of those specific, where that line is drawn between where you can't really, HTMX has served my purposes so far. I'm not hitting that wall, but I do want to know where it is.
I think my extension on that is that, like in this case, it's not just front-end state. It's where you may have so much back-end state related to some view, and it's not all visible, right? Like there's like again, like you've got a giant calculation that's got 20 outputs of that, but you're only looking at one. Like the managing of that whole, because you don't want to you can't run partial of all that because. Because it's required, that data on the way in is required. Like you have to get super clever with, like I'm going to cache this piece. Like it's like the complication of that gets a little crazy. So you kind of just return the whole thing, but then you have to like with Alpine you could probably do it easier than with Hyperscript in that case. Then you may not.
Even then, like you could do like on load or on reveal or something, right? Like. Or not on load, but on reveal. So like almost like as you scroll down, you could bring in those other parts from the back end if you wanted to.
Well, so like in one of them, you're running all the tables for beta calculations, stock market or stock price betas.
Okay.
So equity betas, asset betas, and then the supporting data for asset support to how the asset betas are adjusted relative to the equity betas. You've got the actual beta charts, the chart data from 1 to 5 years with asset or equity betas. You've got the returns for that group of peers. Like, so you've got all of this is calculated. The correlation over 1 to 5 years of all of those relative to the market index that's being used, right?
Yeah.
So all of that is calculated in the same, because it's all the beta table calculations, the prices are all the same going into that, right? So you're kind of like, you're sending back like all of this stuff, right? To a front end JS framework, you're just like here and then toggle between whatever they are. It's fine. It's like not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
I think with Alpine, you could probably do it easier. I just, like I said, I don't want to use Alpine. So
Yeah.
I think I just have an option, like what are we on right now, and click to +1 or whatever, like that'd be super easy to do. I probably should have just done that, but instead of listening for actual events with whatever index that is, like there were some little things I came up with to do it, but like those kind of things, like there are certain times where you just kind of reach like a magnitude of data that it's not like you're not presenting all at once, and it just becomes cumbersome to manage.
Yeah.
When it's all being presented, it's all got to be there if you're going to go between it. You can't go back and get it necessarily. You can cache that whole thing, that's fine, but then you just, again, you run into the whole, I've got to invalidate this whole thing if I need to. And
yeah, caching has its own, and one of the reasons I don't do it that
hardest,
much.
It's so hard.
It is. It's one of those things that is like, it sounds easy. The first time you do it, it's like, oh, that was easy. And then you start to come across the problem.
There's the trickle down of like, you think you have it just right, and then you realize it's not updating over here. And you're like, wow. Oh. So there was like a little clever, so like last thing is, so sort of little trick that, and this is all stuff I'm sure other people have come up with. I'm not like unique in any of this, but there are a lot of like data points that are interrelated, right? So if this changes, different things need to change, but so these have an independent cache for that, like specific page or request. But then as part of that, there's a group cache key. So Redis has the actual, and of this, part of it is the group cache key. Let's just say it's an integer. It's like 1 to start with, right? I don't need to know what all these are that have the group in it. This may just be like client list. And that's set to 1. Well, that's part of client list is part of this whole set, right? And those are just defined very easily. I want to include this view as part of client list, whatever. When there's a change on the model that's associated with a client, I just increment client list by 1 and invalidates the whole cache. So like little things like annoying things like that. Super cool. Like I loved it. But like you're getting into those little worlds. And I know that like I'm kind of being forced in some sense to pre-optimize some of these things. It's not that I want to. It's just it's not usable to do it otherwise.
Well, and this is where the specific knowledge of your business comes in, because not everybody's going to have to do this kind of stuff. Not everybody's doing as much calculation, but you would have to do that no matter what at some level. So caching is maybe going to be part of it.
Yeah,
I'm
going to have a stale on the JS. The JS framework's going to be stale on the front end for a certain period of time, unless I just refetch in the back end.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with real-time, effectively, theoretically real-time data, and it's not just real-time, is that there could be multiple users like on the same client uploading files. It has to be like they've uploaded a file. The other person needs to see that file's uploaded. Yeah, it's not very cool if it's like, well, I'm going to upload one. No, it's already there, right? It's just, there's like when you're dealing, if it's just a world where this is just my own sole app, no one else has access to my little world.
Totally different.
Like it doesn't matter, but when you've got 3 users on a company and they're uploading files at different times and whatever, which is what happens, you're kind of like, well, guys, it's just going to be slower. Sorry.
Right.
Like I'm not caching any of that crap. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
On the front end or the back end, and it's set as a stale time of 0. So like anytime somebody goes to that page, it'll just fetch in the back end and refill it. So it looks a little nicer. But like you're just kind of not going to get a benefit anyway. And I think as you get into
Well,
some like really, I think the farther you get into real world, complicated, data intensive systems, I really think that a lot of the benefit of a JavaScript framework kind of slips away because you need to you need the data has to be fresh.
yeah, that's sort of, it's like you find your priority is these are people trying to get their work done. They need the stuff that's there. It doesn't matter if it, like, it shouldn't look like it's there if it's not really there. And, you know, you don't want to have it not be there if someone else has uploaded, you know, it's like those things start to matter a lot more when you're doing this kind
Yeah,
of.
so some of those pages have the reload like on a timer just to do it,
Yeah.
right? In HTMX, just like every
No,
minute,
it's super handy. I
every
mean, that's,
minute it just hits, you know, in certain things it's cache, so it's just hitting the cache. It's like, nope, but it's up to date. And some things have to be up to date.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I still don't know I don't know where but I'll
Yeah,
write about it eventually, Carson, if you're watching at some point.
yeah. Well, I hope you do as well because I am very interested to see that. So,
Yeah.
just to put in a plug for it. I know it's tough. It's tough when you're a working dev to be doing writing and other stuff on the side. But I really, you know, I appreciate you talking to me about it.
Yeah.
I hope it's helpful maybe in some way, kind of getting your thoughts out there for writing also.
Yeah, it's also just the the deeper and harder you work on something, like this is like critical to like this is like part of me for a lot of other reasons. But
Yeah.
it's always nice to kind of like there's a difference between talking to clients and like things working and they expect it to work and whatever, and that's great. But like every now and again, I'll have like somebody come in and look at the system and they're like, ah, this is the
Yeah.
greatest, right? Like this is greatest. They're a developer and they're like, this is the. So just
Yeah.
even talking about some of the little things that like most people just wouldn't. There's like no feedback, you know. I
Oh,
live
I
in an isolated
know.
world.
Yep.
Um,
No.
I'm in here before it's light, and I leave when it's just getting dark. So it's like it's welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's always nice to talk about it, and yeah, it definitely helps. I think with it's just the time permitting thing. Like I really want to write something on it, and I want to show some solid examples. It's just like my world is. I chose it, so I can't complain, but I'm going to complain.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And maybe there's like a smaller scale version of that comparison, so you don't have to feel like you're comparing the whole app because obviously it's the scale is large. So
yeah, like I want to. Yeah, I think like the most egregious examples, like the most like farthest apart examples, just a couple of them, and maybe there's a continued. Maybe there's like ongoing, like show 2 or 3 examples of things that were like incredibly hard to do in this one and incredibly hard to do in this one, but vice versa, they were easy.
Oh, yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And I, like you said, I don't think a lot of people are in the position where they have like, well, nobody's stupid enough to have like 2 of the exact same apps written side by side. And not including a Vue 2 app sitting over there, right? That's not in prod, but it's like sitting there.
Yeah. That's funny.
Legacy code, man. All right.
Nice. All right. Well, just again, thank you very much for coming on and talking. And
I hope it was at least moderately entertaining and helpful. But
I'm loving it. I love going deep on this stuff and talking about it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah, totally. It was really fun. I appreciate it as well.